Creating hysteria around South African Airways, clearing the air over sale of Telkom shares to bail out South African Airways. The Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba said the details are yet to be finalized. The statement comes after Democratic Alliance Member of Parliament Alf Lees claimed he had documents to show that the government is contemplating selling its stake in Telkom to raise funds for SAA. Now, in light of Citibank's refusal to extend credit to SAA, the minister said they are engaging with the banks.
I would like to therefore caution against any hysteria created by our considering of various options. Cabinet has appointed 4 ministers of public enterprises, telecommunications and postal services, finance and economic development to look at various options to capitalize South African Airways. And once we have finalized that capital structure, we will then go back to cabinet, go through the parliamentary process, and that will then become public at that moment.
Well, the government holds a majority stake in Telkom with 39.75% in shares that are valued at about 14 billion rand. Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba had earlier confirmed that SAA needs 10 billion rand to boost business operations.
Is a fact is that there is a 10 billion rand capitalization that is required for South African Airways, but the form of the source of that recapitalization is not yet finalized. The model of that recapitalization is not yet finalized. I also want to dispel the myth that the leaked memo was a secret document. The document was classified because it was for the attention and eyes of cabinet ministers alone who possessed the relevant security classification to receive documents of that nature. But obviously, the act of the leaking of the document was a criminal act, and we are investigating the source of the leak, and we will take the relevant action in terms of that source once the source is found, so that the person who committed such a transgression should be acted against.
We also have had the minister's views about SAA. In our view, maybe the smaller but flying the highest, which attracts all this amount of attention. We do think that it is important that it's not only getting the money, is have a plan of what this money must go and do. South Africa is waiting to hear for that plan.
Gigaba acknowledged financial leakages at SAA exposed by various forensic reports and said it is now time to stem the rot. Speaking of the current SAA chair, Dudu Myeni, Gigaba said she must leave the board at the end of her term. Myeni's extension as chair expires this month end.
There is a feeling that the current chairperson is being demonized, unfairly attacked, and so on. No. The issue is just about good governance. She has served 8 years. 2 years more than she would have been supposed to serve on the board of South African Airways or any state-owned company for that matter. And in terms of the procedures that we have accepted, 6 years of 3 years per term is acceptable. It is time to hand over to a new chairperson who will carry on the good work that needs to be done with South African Airways to bring it back to financial sustainability and make it a good airline that we believe it can be.
The Minister of Finance has cautioned over creating panic over the possible financial bailout of SAA. He further added that 4 ministers have been appointed to look into the matter. He further added that the leaking of the possible sale of Telkom shares will also be investigated. For ANN7, I am Sindisiwa Twala, Pretoria.
Now, joining us in studio to discuss this further is Mr. Adil Jabeleng, for Transform RSA President. Also joining us in studio is Mr. Christopher Shabangu, that's SACA Deputy President. We also expect a few more guests over the phone line. We'll cross live to them as soon as we get a hold of them. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me this afternoon on ANN7 Newsroom. Are we being hysterical? I mean, the issue of SAA bailout has been raging on, the row has been raging on for quite a while now. Of course, the finance minister said that these are options that are still being looked at. Nothing has been finalized. The stake from Telkom to bail out SAA, is that an option? I'll start with you as SACA. Do you think these are the issues that are bedeviling SAA? Is this the solution?
Good afternoon, and to your viewers. Now, the biggest issue here, we have to look at the root of what needs to be done. As we have a problem where South African Airways has not been properly capitalized since '94. So we have legacy issues here. Is there a need for a bailout now? Yes, there is. There has been a need for a bailout a long time ago, but what has been needed was a proper bailout. A proper recapitalization, let's call it that, yes, recapitalization. So the airline hasn't been recapitalized. Now, in our view as SACA, the decision that the government has taken to recapitalize now, we welcome it. We welcome it. The cross financing of SOEs, Telkom financing, SAA, is that a prudent thing to do? In our view, any type of capitalization that's coming from government is valid, is needed. You must remember, South African Airways, just as an airline, is supporting 68,000 South Africans. Or let's just put it this way, 68,000 are dependent on the existence of South African Airways. So do we have a choice as South Africans to have that airline running? Yes, we have an obligation to have it running. And we cannot have it privatized. Because if we have it privatized, that 68,000 will go down to what? Right, that's
another issue that we'll touch on in just a few minutes. I want to come to you, Adele. There has been forensic reports that have exposed that there's financial mismanagement happening at SAA. It appears that not much is being done about it. I think the finance minister could perhaps have alluded to that. Again, do you think perhaps it's the implementation of policies that could be the problem with SAA and thus the need to continue bailing out SAA?
The biggest problem within SAA currently is the management structure. One is it does not have a permanent CEO, so there's nobody really taking the reins and actually showing direction. The second aspect of it is there is a continuous tension between the board and the executive management. And again, we have said for time immemorial, right, to say that SAA is not losing money because it is not profitable. It is losing money because it is misspent and misappropriated in terms of contracts that do not even make sense. You have an evergreen contract that continues to bleed the airline, which by now it should have actually been renegotiated and brought in line with international standards in terms of the way all other pilots are treated. Whereas when you come into SAA, you find pilots being given a far much more, treatment better than any other. I mean, pilots in SAA are earning an average of 7 million, an ordinary pilot. So how are you going to have a profitable airline when you have such crises? Second is the mismanagement of basic things. In our report, about 7.9 billion was already identified that it could be saved on an annual basis, by the way, if proper operating procedures as well as management and executive management procedures were to be introduced, where you start saving money, you renegotiate contracts, you make sure that there is proper cash flow and there's a recovery of money from all the destinations that are actually collecting on behalf of SAA. SAA is one of the most amazing assets. It gets paid before people fly. So before people utilize the service of the airline, they actually get paid up front. So why would you have a non-profitable airline when you actually get your money up front? So one of the issues that is actually underlooked here, when they talk about recapitalization of SAA and selling one asset in order to save another, here it's a matter of making sure that you put proper, stringent operating processes in place.
Let's get a chief economist to give us their reaction on this. Dr. Azar is joining us on the phone line. A very good afternoon to you, Doctor. Thank you for joining us. Business Model 101, the issue of cross-capitalization of state-owned enterprises, or is it an issue of SAA not having been capitalized properly to start with, as our representative from SACA here was alluding to?
It's a case of the fact that you need to capitalize in relation to the structure of, as he mentioned, your different contracts. And the fact that you have some contracts that are costing you an absolute fortune, whether they are appropriate inappropriate, calls for certain types of capitalization. But the fact is that if you look internationally, in most countries, then there is no national airline. They have been all privatized, which suggests that capitalization by a government does not appear to be the most appropriate way of actually running airlines. They are not seen to be sufficiently strategic for government to own them.
And just before I let you go, Doctor, as I understand we don't have a lot of time with you, the Democratic Alliance has been gunning for the privatization of SAA. It is the national carrier. What do you think the private sector could do that the government is failing to do?
Well, one of the very important issues that the private sector tends to do, because it is driven to generate a profit and not to lose money, it makes sure that the airline or whatever company you're involved in is run much more efficiently. And one solution that has been put forward by many, it's a solution that's been tried in China, that is being used in China, is for partial privatization. In other words, for the government to have the majority stake, but to have private sector ownership as well. And that creates an oversight on how the business is run and how it is capitalized. And unfortunately, there seems to be a reluctance even to go in the direction of partial ownership. In fact, a classic example of the success of partial ownership has been Telkom. And now we look to try and sell off the remaining part that government owns, simply because it has been run so effectively since it's been partially owned by private interests.
Let me get a reaction on that from my guest in studio. I don't know who wants to pick this up, Adele?
I think
partial privatization, perhaps,
look,
being an answer?
What Dr. Jermaine says in terms of partial privatization, yes, it could work in terms of bringing in a management. At this stage, there's not really need. You really need to put an effective team of real people who are going to take the operations of SAA, in this case, into heart and saying, really, we are going to produce a national airline carrier that is going to provide and be one of the best in terms of efficiencies, in terms of optimization of services, in terms of ensuring that people adhere. Right now, you have problems within SAA that are actually solvable. You have over 60% of the contracts which are not even valid contracts. They haven't followed PFMA and they haven't been aligned with regards to industry standards. So the current issues were actually mitigated by interests. One is it is in the best interest of most people who are currently eating and actually using SAA as a cash cow to see it bleed money. So selling off an asset like Telkom, which is a highly actually efficient machinery and again a partially owned state company, is not going to help. Again, if you look at what Telkom has been doing, we are entering into the new age of a digital economy where telecommunications is everything. You're selling Telkom for 14 billion. When you have an infrastructure which is actually worth in the hundreds of billions. Think about each and every house in South Africa that is currently connected by a telecom line. That is something that you don't sell away because the future is telecommunications, whether we like it or not. Everything has gone internet and the Internet of Things is pervading. So I don't think it's a wise idea for the minister to even put on the table the selling off of a complete asset like Telkom in order to recapitalize SAA.
Right.
SAA needs to be sustainable by itself and it must stay within South African ownership. It is high time we stop privatizing assets in South Africa in order to bail out badly managed and underperforming institutions.
Mr. Zamo Madlala from Black Empowerment Foundation joins us over the phone line. Very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. So, news coming from Parliament yesterday, Democratic Alliance Member of Parliament Alf Lee dropping a bombshell that he was in possession of documents that claim that the National Treasury is looking at selling a stake from Telkom to recapitalize SAA. Your reaction to that?
Okay, thanks for the opportunity, Audrey, and good afternoon to your panel and all the viewers. Firstly, I just want to disagree with the good doctor and Mr. Nchabeling. The issue of privatization of SAA should just not even on the cards. In the late 90s, we did try and do the same thing with Swiss Air. We sold 20% to them and then later on sold a further 10%, and the entire thing was reversed. Now, the doctor is right in saying that internationally, there's a drive for airlines not to be owned by the state. But currently, when you look at South Africa and we look at our developmental goals in terms of Africa and the continent as a whole, we will at times carry routes that may not be necessarily profitable per se, but that could be generally profitable for the relations that we want to foster within the continent. So the issue of privatization, we must just take it straight off the table. Secondly, the issue of selling Telkom, that must not even hit the table. Now, we must find another solution. So rather than continuing to arrest the minister and tell him that he must not sell Telkom, he must not sell Telkom for 14 billion. If you look at what Telkom paid this year alone in terms of dividend and those kinds of payments to the state, you would find that 14 billion the state could see in about 6-7 years. So that asset must just not be sold. There is major drive that government must still carry out itself through its own fiscus. Now, it doesn't just make any sense at all for the government to get rid of the Telkom stake. But then let's provide a solution to the minister. The China Development Bank made money available to us at minimal interest. What we need to do is to restructure our debt. Whilst restructuring our debt, then we also have to look at actually how much does SAA really need to be capitalized by. The story of 8 billion, I don't really buy it. You are sitting with accumulated losses of up to 30 billion on the books. If you look and you analyze the balance sheet of SAA, it's only a going concern because government is constantly providing these guarantees for them to go to market to borrow. So we need to go and look at the whole team that is carrying SAA. We have now appointed a CEO who comes from the commercial game, and he must be given a chance. And he must be given a chance to come in with a board that is going to support him to turn that thing around. I mean, if we consider Scopa, just the other day, the question was asked on an AR contract that is worth 1.6 billion. The answer still wasn't given. What was promised was that on the 29th, the board is meeting and all these things will be finalized and they'll become public. But we know that there's about
Zamo, that was going to be my next point, so I'll have to hold your thought there. I think what I'm getting from Zamo is, that SAA really needs to sustain itself. If it means debt restructuring, to make sure that they find a way to implement these policies. But again, it goes back to the human resources, doesn't it? And their, capacity, if they're able to do this. Dudumuyeni has been demonized. Some people would say that in the past years to say perhaps she's the sole reason why SAA has not been doing so well. But we do know that the board and the management team, presented themselves in Parliament. They were not able to answer quite a bit of questions. I mean, can we really stick it to one person?
Look, Mr. Valdez just nailed it. We had Swiss Air before. Swiss Air came as a partner in South African Airways, and nothing changed basically. So what does that take us? It takes us back to the fact of proper recapitalization. Yeah, if we got to say. I hold a different, or we hold a different view here. If we have to now debate the issue of cross capitalization by state-owned entities, what are they there for? If we're going to complain, I understand the reasons that Mr. Madlala is giving. I completely understand. If you're going to be saying that let's let Telkom run on their own, absolutely, that's fine. But if government is trying to find money in a particular way, and they then identify, if they then identify one of the state-owned companies as Telkom as where they can get the money from, to us, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I don't see any issue with that. As long as there is, the issue here is that if you're going to be taking money to SAA, what are you taking it there for? Are you recapitalizing under the same management? Are you recapitalizing the same way of doing business? Are you changing things? So where the money comes from is not important as long as it's not putting debt into SAA. Change the structures, involve the stakeholders when it comes to procurement processes at SAA. It has been said so many times in the studio that SAA can sustain itself. It can manage to run as a business on its own without a recapitalization. Well, let me just put it this way. If it's properly recapitalized, it can run on its own for quite a long time.
Right.
there is a need for recapitalization. Where's that money going to come from? Let the experts come with it. We're not.
And speaking of experts, I think almost every finance minister that we've had has always said we need more expertise to, come to SAA and provide problems. I think the issue of also a stable, board and retaining staff, I think you raised that Adil a few minutes ago. Do you think Minister Gigaba has a solid plan going forward for SAA?
I don't think Minister Gigaba understands the real issues that are sitting within SAA. There are two issues that you need to solve when you're dealing with airline industry. One is your fuel cost. The second one is your fleet cost. And in these issues, the two are currently mismanagement completely. If you remember that there was a point where there was an overhedging of the fuel within SAA, where they were overpaying because the the rand-dollar exchange in terms of the oil pricing had changed. Secondly is their fleet. They had a fleet of airlines which they sold off to Macquarie and then relisted back and started paying a lease premium. Those are the most inefficient manner of actually. You cannot have an industry whereby you do not own partially your capital asset, which is your cash generating asset. And whoever advised them in the way of saying sell off and then lease back was actually misguiding and misleading the airline, because right now the airline does not have a balance sheet that is positive, which they could have actually borrowed against a positive balance sheet in this case, and they would have had a healthier business operating. Secondly is the revenues that are generated do not ever come back, by the way, to SAA. And then you have all of these other unnecessary expenses, which do not make sense as to why.
So what are the solutions? Perhaps we should get Dr. Azar, he's the chief economist, back up, to give us a reaction with that. Dr. Azar, I do hope that you can hear me. If you were to look at the situation with SAA, is it redeemable? 3 top things that you think the company needs to do to redeem itself, if at all it's possible, from this problem.
I think it is redeemable. I think that we have to look at where the company is running profitably and where it is losing a lot of money. From what I have been told, it's the international connections that are losing an awful lot of money at the moment. And we need to consider whether or not it is appropriate to have an international connecting network, or whether to give it to the likes of Ethiopian Airlines or Emirates or someone who are managing to run travel to South Africa very effectively at the moment. But certainly on the domestic lines, if you believe that you need a national carrier for domestically, from what I gather, it is, and the planes are full, it seems to be running quite efficiently. And it may make sense to concentrate on that.
Zama, I hope you're still with us. Dr. Azar, they're just giving us, throwing around some options that SAA could look at, looking at the international routes and the domestic routes, perhaps to get other international airliners to come in and help, if possible.
Okay, in terms of actually resolving the SAA problem, there's a couple of things that have happened that have actually shown us what we need to do. Number one, we need to get SAA out of Treasury. Treasury must recapitalize the business and then let the business go to transport. Last week, our planes were grounded in Zimbabwe and transport had to come in. So it actually makes sense for that particular business to be managed by transport, because transport also manages AXA. We've got issues where we've got British Airways flying up all over our country, but when we fly to London, but we don't do any connecting flights. So all of those things need to be sorted out. So what needs to happen is that firstly, the right department needs to be managing SAA. Straight after it's capitalized by Treasury. And then you need to go and put in a team. And when we first Coleman Andrews back in the late 90s, he came, he sold the players, and then we paid him 232 million without him paying tax, which was total nonsense. We have got the skills locally. I would bet my last rand, we've got the skills locally to manage and turn the airline around. The only thing is that there must be the commitment, the political will to actually go in there and appoint the right people, give them the authority to turn the airline around, give them the time to present a plan, and then let them execute it.
Well, thank you for that reaction and insight. Zamo Madlala, the Black Empowerment Foundation, joining us on the phone line. We'll just get closing remarks from all our guests. Back in studio, Christopher, as SACA, you had wanted to lay charges against SAA for tender irregularities. Again, going back to the procurement process and how it's a major issue and how it could impact, the bleeding SAA. Going forward, how do you think this should be tackled?
Well, for us, it's doable. We have late charges. That's done. We're moving forward.
All right.
The good part about what's happening now is that we're talking about stuff. We're talking about things. We're sitting. We're discussing this. Therefore, that's the beginning of a solution, beginning of moving forward. When it comes to procurement processes at SAA, as a way forward, you need to involve all stakeholders. In this case, there is unions within South Africa. We're not saying SACA only. There's other unions that are there. Involve them, so that in the future you're not then faced with a situation where this one is blamed, that one is blamed. Everyone can take a decision.
And everyone can be held to account. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut it up. They were running out of time. Adil, very quickly, closing remarks.
I think SAA needs to change its approach to customers. SAA is still expensive as an airline right now. It needs to start looking at how it actually can take up a sizable share of the market by making sure that it becomes a reasonable local airline carrier as well as an international airline carrier. Right now, it's losing a lot of its business to international competitors. It does not need to be that way. If they just re-strategize and actually put efficiencies in place, they could be one of the top airline in the country and internationally.
Right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you for joining in the show and your insight, Dr. Azaja Maim, joining us on the phone line as well. Well, thank you at home for watching the program. Of course, the conversation can continue online. Our Twitter handle is @ANN7TV. Tell us what you think needs to happen with SAA.